So I want to start with something that might be a little uncomfortable to hear, and I say that with genuine respect, because if you're watching this, you're probably someone who actually tries. You think about your health. You make an effort at breakfast. Maybe you've been having oatmeal for years because you were told it's good for your cholesterol. Maybe you start your morning with a glass of orange juice because, well, that's what healthy people do, right? Vitamin C, natural, from a fruit. Maybe you have whole wheat toast with a little jam, or a bowl of bran cereal with some banana slices on top. And here's what I want to say. First, your intentions are good. Genuinely, you're not doing anything reckless. You're doing what decades of dietary guidelines told you to do. But what if I told you that for many adults over 55, that exact breakfast, the one that looks so responsible, is setting off a cascade of metabolic events that leaves you tired by 10:30, foggy by noon, and quietly pushing your body toward insulin resistance month after month? What if the breakfast you've been relying on is actually one of the reasons you can't lose that weight around your midsection, or why your joints feel worse in the morning than they should, or why your energy just collapses in the early afternoon? I've been in clinical practice for over 30 years. I've worked in internal medicine, metabolic health, geriatrics, and this pattern, this specific pattern, is something I see so often that I almost consider it an epidemic that nobody's naming, because it doesn't show up as a diagnosis. It shows up as tiredness, as stiffness, as a patient telling me, I just don't feel like myself anymore. Let me explain what I mean, and I'm going to take my time with this because it deserves more than a soundbite. Your body at 58 or 63 does not handle glucose the way it did at 35. That's not an opinion. That's physiology. And yet, most of the breakfast advice people follow was developed based on studies done predominantly on younger populations. Or it was designed to address one specific concern, like cholesterol, without considering the broader metabolic picture that becomes critically important as you age. Let me tell you about a patient of mine. I'll call her Evelyn. She was 61 when she first came to see me, referred by her primary care doctor because her fasting glucose was creeping up. Not diabetic, not even officially pre-diabetic, just trending in a direction that made her doctor uneasy. Evelyn was doing everything right. She walked 3 times a week. She didn't smoke. She'd cut out red meat years ago. And every morning, without fail, she had a bowl of steel-cut oatmeal with honey, a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice, and sometimes a piece of whole grain toast. On paper, that's a textbook healthy breakfast. I mean, any nutritionist would look at that and nod approvingly. But when we put a continuous glucose monitor on Evelyn, just to see what was actually happening inside her body in real time, the picture was very different from what either of us expected. Within 45 minutes of eating that breakfast, her blood glucose was spiking to about 185 milligrams per deciliter. For context, a normal post-meal reading should stay under 140, ideally well under. She was hitting 185, sometimes higher, and then, about 2 hours later, it would crash. Drop down into the 70s or even the high 60s, and that crash, that's when Evelyn felt it. That's when the fatigue hit, the mental fog, the vague shakiness, the sudden craving for something sweet to bring her back up. She'd been living in this cycle for years, and she thought it was just aging. Now let me explain what's happening here, because this isn't unique to Evelyn. This is happening in living rooms and kitchens all across this country every single morning. When you eat a breakfast that's predominantly carbohydrate, and I know oatmeal doesn't feel like it's in the same category as a donut, but metabolically, the difference is smaller than you'd think. Your digestive system breaks those carbohydrates down into glucose relatively quickly. Even steel-cut oatmeal, even whole grains. They're better than refined grains, sure. They break down a bit slower, but they're still primarily starch, and starch is just glucose molecules linked together. Your body is very efficient at taking those apart. So now you've got a rapid influx of glucose entering your bloodstream, and your pancreas responds by releasing insulin. Insulin is the hormone that tells your cells to absorb that glucose. Think of insulin as a key that unlocks the doors of your cells so glucose can get in and be used for energy. In a younger body, this system tends to work smoothly. The insulin comes out, the glucose goes into the cells, blood sugar comes back down to a reasonable level, and everything's fine. But after about 50 or 55, and this varies, it's not an exact cutoff, something changes. Your cells start becoming less responsive to insulin. The key still fits the lock, but the lock is getting stiff, so your pancreas has to produce more insulin to get the same result. That's insulin resistance, and it doesn't happen overnight. It develops gradually, over years, and in the early stages, your lab work might look completely normal because your pancreas is compensating. It's working harder to keep your blood sugar in range. But that extra effort has consequences. Higher circulating insulin promotes fat storage, particularly around the abdomen. It increases inflammatory signaling throughout the body. It affects how your brain uses energy. It can worsen joint inflammation. And over time, it exhausts the pancreatic beta cells that produce insulin, which is how type 2 diabetes eventually develops in many people. Now here's the part that connects directly to breakfast. The morning is when your body is most insulin resistant. This is normal physiology. It's called the dawn phenomenon. Your body naturally releases cortisol and growth hormone in the early morning hours to help you wake up, and those hormones temporarily increase insulin resistance. So the first meal of the day hits a body that is, by its very nature, least equipped to handle a big glucose load. And what are most seniors eating first thing in the morning? The most glucose-heavy meal of their entire day. Oatmeal, orange juice, toast, cereal, banana, maybe yogurt with granola and honey. Every single one of those is essentially sugar in different packaging. Not all the same kind of sugar, not all at the same speed, but the end result in your bloodstream is remarkably similar. I had another patient, a man named Gerald, 67 years old, retired engineer, very sharp mind, very methodical. He came to me because he was gaining weight despite eating less than he ever had in his life. He was frustrated. He told me, "I eat a small, healthy breakfast, I have a reasonable lunch, and a light dinner. I don't snack. And I'm still gaining weight." When I asked him what his healthy breakfast was, he described a bowl of grape nut cereal with skim milk and a glass of orange juice. And I remember pausing because I knew what he was about to hear wasn't going to be easy. Grape nuts, per serving, has about 47 grams of carbohydrates. Skim milk adds another 12 or so. The orange juice, a standard 8-ounce glass, has about 26 grams of sugar, no fiber to slow it down, because the fiber was removed when the fruit was juiced. So Gerald's small, healthy breakfast was delivering roughly 85 grams of carbohydrate in one sitting. That's the glucose equivalent of, and I don't say this to be dramatic, I say it because it's roughly accurate, eating more than 20 teaspoons of sugar. Gerald didn't believe me at first. I don't blame him. Orange juice feels wholesome. It feels natural. It comes in a carton with pictures of orchards on it. But your bloodstream doesn't care about the packaging. It processes that sugar the same way, regardless of where it came from. And for a 67-year-old man with age-related insulin resistance, that breakfast was essentially a metabolic assault every single morning. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not saying oatmeal is poison. I'm not saying you should never have orange juice again. That kind of absolute thinking isn't helpful, and it's not honest. What I am saying is that the context matters enormously. Your age matters. Your metabolic status matters. And the composition of the entire meal matters. A 30-year-old marathon runner can probably handle that oatmeal and orange juice breakfast without any problems. Their insulin sensitivity is high. Their muscle mass is actively pulling glucose out of the blood, and their system resets quickly. But that same breakfast in a 60-year-old body with declining muscle mass, reduced insulin sensitivity, and less metabolic flexibility, it's a completely different story. And this is what frustrates me about the way nutrition guidelines work in this country. The advice is generalized. Whole grains are healthy. Fruit is good for you. Start your day with a balanced breakfast. These statements aren't wrong in the abstract, but they ignore the reality that your body at 62 is fundamentally different from your body at 32, and the failure to communicate that difference is, in my opinion, causing real harm. Let me talk about what happens downstream from these glucose spikes, because the effects go far beyond just feeling tired. When your blood sugar spikes and then crashes, your body experiences a stress response. Cortisol goes up, inflammatory markers increase. Your body perceives that crash as a kind of emergency. It thinks glucose is suddenly scarce, even though you just had too much of it an hour ago. So it triggers hunger, it triggers cravings, particularly for carbohydrates and sugar, because those will bring blood sugar back up fastest, and so you reach for a snack, a muffin, a cracker, more juice, and the cycle repeats. This is why so many of my older patients tell me they're hungry all the time, despite eating regularly. They're trapped in a glucose roller coaster, and every spike creates the next valley, and every valley creates the next craving. It's not a willpower problem. I want to be very clear about that. It's a hormonal, metabolic problem driven by food choices that were supposed to be healthy. And the inflammation piece, this is something I don't think gets enough attention. Repeated glucose spikes trigger the release of inflammatory cytokines. These are signaling molecules that promote inflammation throughout the body. And if you're already dealing with arthritis, or joint stiffness, or general aches that seem to be getting worse with age, this chronic low-grade inflammation is making it worse. I've had patients whose joint pain improved measurably, not from a new medication, not from surgery, but from changing what they ate for breakfast. That sounds almost too simple to be true, but I've seen it happen enough times to take it very seriously. The brain fog connection is real too. Your brain is the most glucose-dependent organ in your body, but it needs stable glucose supply. When levels are spiking and crashing, your cognitive function follows the same curve. Clear and sharp after eating, then muddy and slow 2 hours later. Patients describe it as feeling like they're thinking through cotton wool. And many of them have just accepted this as normal aging. It often isn't. So let me talk about what actually works. And this is what I've come to call, informally, the savory breakfast rule. It's not a diet. It's not a protocol. I haven't written a book about it or trademarked it. It's just a practical principle I've developed over years of working with older patients and watching what happens when they shift their first meal of the day. The principle is simple. After 55, your first meal should be built around protein, healthy fats, and fiber, not around starch and sugar. Savory, not sweet. That's it. That's the rule. When you start your day with protein eggs, for example, or a piece of fish, or some cheese, or even leftover chicken from last night, your blood sugar stays remarkably stable. Protein stimulates almost no glucose spike. It triggers a moderate insulin response that actually helps with satiety. It gives your muscles amino acids they need, which becomes increasingly important as age-related muscle loss accelerates, and it doesn't set off that crash and crave cycle. Fat does something similar. Avocado, olive oil, nuts, butter in moderation, these slow gastric emptying, which means whatever glucose does enter your bloodstream comes in gradually instead of all at once. And dietary fat has essentially zero direct impact on blood sugar. Fiber from vegetables mainly, not from grain-based cereals, adds bulk, feeds your gut bacteria, and further slows the absorption of glucose. So instead of oatmeal and orange juice, imagine this: 2 eggs cooked however you like, half an avocado, maybe some sautéed spinach or a few cherry tomatoes, and a cup of black coffee or tea. That breakfast will keep your blood sugar stable for 4 to 5 hours. You won't crash at 10:30. You won't need a snack by 11. Your energy will be steady, your thinking will be clearer, and your joints over time may actually feel better because you've removed one of the biggest daily triggers of systemic inflammation. I suggested this to Evelyn. She was resistant at first. She'd been eating oatmeal for so long it felt like part of her identity. And I told her, you don't have to give it up forever. Just try the savory approach for 2 weeks and see how you feel. She did. And when she came back, she told me something I've heard many times since. She said, "I can't believe the difference. I actually have energy in the morning. I'm not crashing. I'm not starving by lunchtime. And my knees feel better." The knees surprised her. It didn't surprise me. Gerald had a similar experience. He switched to eggs and vegetables in the morning, dropped the cereal and the juice. Within a month, he'd lost 4 pounds without trying. His afternoon energy improved dramatically, and his fasting glucose, which had been slowly climbing for years, actually came down a few points. Now, I want to offer some nuance here, because I think nuance is important, and it's usually the first casualty of nutrition advice. Not everyone will respond the same way. Some people tolerate oatmeal reasonably well, especially if they add protein and fat to it, like nuts and seeds stirred into the oatmeal, which blunts the glucose spike considerably. Some people do fine with a small amount of fruit in the morning if it's paired with protein. A few berries with Greek yogurt is very different, metabolically, from a tall glass of orange juice on an empty stomach. The issue isn't that any single food is evil. The issue is the pattern. A carbohydrate-dominant breakfast, consumed every day, in a body that handles glucose less efficiently than it used to, that pattern creates cumulative damage. And the cumulative nature is why it's so insidious. You don't feel the damage from one breakfast. You feel it after years of breakfasts. And by then, you've developed insulin resistance, you've gained visceral fat, your inflammation markers are elevated, and everyone tells you it's just aging. It's not just aging, or rather it's aging made worse by choices that nobody warned you about. I also want to address something that comes up when I talk to patients about this. They ask me, "Why hasn't my doctor told me this?" And honestly, it's a fair question. Part of the answer is that nutritional training in medical school is minimal. I'm talking maybe 20 hours total in most programs. Doctors are trained to diagnose and treat disease, not to analyze your breakfast. Part of it is that dietary guidelines are influenced by food industry lobbying in ways that most people don't fully appreciate. And part of it is that the science of glucose metabolism and aging is relatively recent in terms of reaching clinical practice. Continuous glucose monitors, which have given us incredible insight into how real food affects real people in real time, have only been widely available for a few years. Before that, we were relying on fasting glucose tests, which tell you almost nothing about what happens after you eat. The knowledge is catching up, but practice changes slowly in medicine, very slowly. And in the meantime, millions of older adults are eating breakfasts that are quietly undermining their health, and they're being told they're doing the right thing. I should mention one more thing about the savory breakfast approach that I think matters. It's sustainable, and sustainability is everything when you're talking about dietary changes in older adults. I've seen people try keto, try intermittent fasting, try all kinds of restrictive approaches. Some of them work for a while. But most of my patients over 60 don't want to count macros or skip meals or measure ketones. They want to eat normal food, feel good, and get on with their day. The savory breakfast rule fits into a normal life. You're not eliminating food groups. You're not fasting. You're just shifting the composition of one meal, eggs instead of cereal. That's it. And the downstream effects on energy, inflammation, weight, and cognitive clarity can be genuinely remarkable. I want to close by saying something that I feel is important. You are not to blame for what you didn't know. If you've been eating oatmeal and orange juice for 20 years because you were told it was healthy, you were following the best advice available to you. That advice was incomplete, and in some cases, it was wrong, at least for people in your age group. But you didn't fail. The system failed to update its recommendations as the science evolved. What you can do now is start paying attention. Notice how you feel after breakfast. Really notice. Not just whether you enjoyed the food, but how your energy is 2 hours later, whether you're reaching for a snack by mid-morning, whether your joints feel stiffer on some mornings than others. Whether your thinking is clearer on certain days, your body is giving you information all the time. Most of us just haven't been taught to listen to it in the context of what we eat. Try the savory approach for a couple of weeks. Just observe. You don't need to make a permanent decision right now. Just collect some data on yourself. And if you feel better, if your energy stabilizes, if the fog lifts, if the afternoon crash goes away, then you'll have your answer. Not from me, not from a study, but from your own body. That's the most reliable source of information you'll ever have. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your experience. What do you eat for breakfast? Have you noticed the patterns I've described? Have you tried changing your morning meal and seen a difference? Leave a comment. These conversations matter. They help other people who are watching and wondering if maybe, just maybe, the breakfast they've trusted for years deserves a second look. Thank you for your time. And take care of yourselves, not with perfection, just with a little more awareness than you had yesterday.